The high desert of New Mexico is part of a vast plateau, significantly larger than the Australian state of Victoria, which covers extensive parts of 4 different American states.
This high desert is part of a huge geologic formation called the Colorado Plateau. It's an incredibly interesting place.
The Colorado Plateau is most famous for the Grand Canyon, but the entire area is just a feast for the eyes.
The pale colors of the land speak to the fact that it only receives a few hundred millimeters of precipitation a year.
In 2014, while hiking the plateau in an area between La Jolla del Pedregal and Rio Puerco, about 2,000 meters above sea level, a hiker spotted what looked like a pointed bone protruding from the dry earth.
Along with the pointed bone are 4 others, a jawbone as well as 3 ribs. These bones are big, so obviously they belong to a very large animal.
The area used to be home to animals such as the grizzly bear, gray wolf, wolverine, and bison, all of which are mostly gone due to human activity. However, these bones don't appear to be from any of those animals. So if not them, then what animal could it be?
After a hiker in New Mexico discovered the bones of a very large animal, archaeologists were called to the site to investigate and immediately found more bones.
The pointed bone is not so much a bone as it is a tusk, and a very peculiar, easily identifiable one at that. That tells me that this tusk likely belonged to prehistoric megafauna that once roamed across the American steppe. That leaves us 2 possibilities: the mastodon and the mammoth.
The mastodon's tusks were straight, while the mammoth's tusks curled in towards each other. So it's likely that these bones belong to a mammoth.
The archaeologists find that many of the bones have been broken and quickly determine that they actually belong to not 1, but 2 woolly mammoths.
Discovering the remains of 1 mammoth would be a rare occurrence, but 2? That's really a once-in-a-lifetime thing.
The remains were found to be of a young female, who was most probably the mother of the second mammoth in the bone pile, a calf.
Mammoths would have called high plateaus like this one home. But around 10,000 years ago, they suffered a catastrophic habitat loss as a result of climate change. This caused their eventual extinction. But how did these 2 mammoths die?
Only a few meters away from where the bone pile was found, the archaeologists also discovered an obsidian projectile point.
This is basically a weapon made from volcanic rock. It likely would have been attached to a shaft to make a spear or an arrow.
They quickly determined that it has the telltale shaping of a Clovis period projectile, meaning that it was skillfully crafted with grooves cut into the surface along the edge, and it's shaped like a leaf. And given its design, it is of course incredibly sharp.
The Clovis era refers to roughly a 300-year period between 13,500 to 12,700 years ago. This is when the culture and its technology appeared and spread across the Americas.
In archaeological terms, the Clovis period is defined by the spread of this particular kind of technology, projectile points that were fashioned in a very specific manner.
This seems to be an ancient kill site. So could this mammoth have been brought down by Clovis hunters?
The archaeologists carbon dated the bones and were astonished to discover that they were approximately 38,000 years old, and therefore these mammoths couldn't have been killed by Clovis-era hunters.
This is truly remarkable because the general consensus has been that humans only arrived in the Americas some 16,000 years ago. So how would this be possible?
The accepted theory is that humans first arrived in the Western Hemisphere via the Bering Land Bridge that connected today's North America with East Asia.
We have long tried to map out migration patterns into the Americas and often ignored the evidence present in indigenous oral histories. But academic perspectives are changing when it comes to the value and accuracy of oral histories. Even so, we always look for other supporting evidence to back up our theories.
In order to be certain that this is a kill site, the archaeologists need to inspect the bones looking for telltale signs of butchering or processing of the 2 animals.
CT scans revealed that the bone breakage was highly patterned, a technical term meaning that specific force had been applied to specific places, causing shards to break off.
The shards are what are called butterfly fragments. It's a term used to describe when blunt force is applied to one side of a bone, but the opposite side breaks, sending fragments flying.
Butterfly fragments are an essential find here because only humans are capable of causing such damage.
Every bone except for one showed perimortem damage, meaning damage caused at the time of death. In other words, there was no indication that the bones had time to heal.
Finally, the CT scans reveal that several bones have been punctured, likely in order to drain the marrow. And in order to do so, you would need a good fire to melt that marrow into grease.
They also found signs of a sustained burn, meaning that someone was likely watching over it.
It's clear that the mammoth was butchered by humans, and this would have taken place 20,000 years earlier than what was previously thought possible.
This is truly a fascinating turn of events. This could rewrite everything we know about human history and about ancient migration patterns all across the world.
Archaeologists must question when humans may have arrived in North America. The oldest human remains and DNA found in the Americas to date were found near Wilsall, Montana. In 1968, a construction worker unearthed scores of prehistoric tools, as well as the skull of a child, at a location known as the Anzick site.
It turned out that the tools were all patterned in the familiar Clovis style. The skull itself was roughly 12,700 years old, and it belonged to a child of the ancient Clovis culture.
This little boy would have been the descendant of an Asian population that migrated across the Bering Land Bridge around 16,000 years ago. Meaning, most indigenous groups in the Americas today can trace their ancestry back to these specific people.
But how could people have been in the Americas almost 40,000 years ago when these mammoths were around? Who were they?
Despite most of those indigenous to the Americas descending from an Asian population group that arrived around 16,000 years ago, they weren't the only ones to have populated this hemisphere. So who else did?
Researchers have found that the Surui and Caritiana, people indigenous to the Brazilian Amazon, carry traits more closely related to Australasian population groups than they do to Asian groups.
This is fascinating. This means that the same people that migrated into Papua New Guinea, Australia, and the Andaman Islands would also have made it across the Bering Land Bridge and into the Americas. And they would have done so thousands of years before the second group.
Exactly when this would have happened is unknown, but this genetic signature is not present at all amongst the indigenous populations of the people descended from the Anzick child.
So there must have been at least two groups and two separate periods of migration into the Americas. And the ones who killed and ate these two mammoths in the high desert of New Mexico likely had distant relatives in Australia.
As time progressed, this initial group was replaced by a secondary one from Northeast Asia, the one that has to date been seen as the first to populate the Americas.
When it comes to discoveries like this, we would be better served by listening to the descendants of the people we are discussing in order to obtain a fuller picture of long ago events.
This story is also an important reminder that some of the theories we profess as absolute aren't necessarily accurate, and that we need to approach this topic, and really any topic, with a healthy dose of humility and curiosity.